Hey, Chris Bat Savage, if you're on, can you let me know if you can hear me?
Hey, Steven, I can hear you.
All right, thanks.
Before we get started today, Shelley wanted me to mention a couple things. There's drinks, coffee and stuff right outside the door here. Don't go up to the counter to get it right here. And if you need to go to the bathroom, you have to walk all the way around past the elevators, and it's all the way on the end. And also, it is a co-ed bathroom, so don't get shocked if you walked in there.
Separate stalls.
Yeah, co-ed separate stalls, but it's still not getting used to. It's hard to get used to. All right, welcome everyone to the October Mid-Atlantic Fishing Council meeting. Glad to see everyone here, and I think we got a couple more still coming. I see Mike for the first time in 7 years and 2 months can smile at a meeting. And with that, let's get started with our first item on the agenda, Executive Committee meeting. Chris, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to New York City, Sunny's favorite hotel. I was very disappointed that the ball wasn't in the middle of the room like the last time I was here, but that's beyond our control, Sunny. Today we're here with the Executive Committee in open session to talk about a couple of things. Number one, we're going to start with the 2023 implementation plan and go over the list of deliverables that we basically talked about last year relative to 2023. And then we'll get into a 2024 discussion. The idea behind today's meeting is basically to have the Executive Committee agree on a draft for the 2024 implementation plan, or the deliverables anyway, that we'll take to the council in December. So any questions about how we're going to proceed today? So we have 2 hours for our conversation today. It's likely that we'll use up most of that 2 hours. There's a number of documents beyond tab 1 that if you haven't looked at yet, include the 2023 proposed actions deliverables, a draft 2024 proposed action and deliverable document, and a staff memo related to the Black Sea Bass Commercial Estate Allocation Amendment. That memo is from Julia to me. There's also a supplemental document that Mary posted this, I think it was yesterday. That's titled Draft 2024 Project Descriptions. So that's a document that was posted yesterday. If you can't find it, let me know. But we will be referencing all those documents in our conversation today. So let's start with 2023. Getting feedback. Stephen, we're okay if these mics go red, green. Got some blinking mics as well. See how that works. Okay, we'll try this, see how it goes. So we're 3/4 through the year, just talking about 2023. First document that we're going to look at is the 2023 actions and deliverables. This document is very similar to the document that you saw last year if you were on the council. Basically, I'll go through this very quickly just to give you an idea of how we did. And from my perspective, we did very well. Had a lot of work that we accomplished in 2023. And basically, if you haven't seen this document before, there's the definition part, that indicates what each one of those terms means: completed, in progress, ongoing, delayed, or postponed. Take a look at that. So the first set includes summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. We had the 2024-2025 specifications that we completed. 2024-2025 recreational management measures will be taken care of in December in our meeting with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Board. We had an evaluation of the scup DRAs, and we'll talk about that as it relates to a 2024 potential action item. We will have a presentation in December on the commercial minimum mesh size regulation and exemptions for those 3 species. We have we did initiate the development of an action to replace the recreational harvest control rule after the sunset period, including enhanced use of the recreational demand model and/or recreational fleet dynamics model. But that's an ongoing issue as well, and we anticipate that we will continue the development of that action through 2025. The one thing that did get delayed from this set of activities is the development of an amendment to consider recreational sector separation and recreational catch accounting for summer flounder, scut black sea bass, and bluefish. We talked about that, I think, at our last meeting. We'll talk about it again in December in terms of the timeline for continued action on that particular item. That is something that we'll pick up in 2024. We had our typical advisory panel fishery performance reports. We supported a black sea bass research track assessment. It says peer review to occur in October 2023. This week we got word that in fact that peer review will occur in December or February. Right, Brandon? December. So keep your fingers crossed, December. We also supported the management track assessments for those 3 species. We are continuing to support the recreational demand model decision support tool. We did complete our comments on the partial disapproval of the black sea bass commercial state allocation amendment. So that's it for summer flounder, scut black sea bass for 2023. Any questions or comments before I move on to bluefish? And Mr. Chair, if you could let me know about online. Peter.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Manhattan. On the priorities discussion that took place up in New England last week, we added a priority to engage the enforcement committee to help us better understand how VMS works. Because it used to be that VMS 10 years ago, if my boat entered an access area when they're not supposed to enter that area, we would get a phone call and the boat would get a nastygram and they'd be told to return to port. And then OLE or somebody from the state of New Jersey would meet that vessel and do a boarding, a shoreside boarding right there because they'd broken the law. And because of that, they would get themselves in a lot of trouble. That's not currently how it's being used anymore. So they added it to their priorities to have that discussion and engage their enforcement committee. But it might be something that we want to consider, and it might be worthy of a conversation with them on maybe, because it affects us also. So why not do it, jointly for one presentation by OLE and the Coast Guard, and to better help us understand how the tool is supposed to be used, because the way that it was originally designed was for enforcement, and it doesn't seem as though that it's somewhere along the way that has changed. So I'm just wondering if something like that needs to be elevated to ours also. So thank you.
So yeah, when we get to, let's try this. Same feedback, a little bit better. So Peter, yeah, keep that in mind when we get to the 2024 possible action items or deliverables. So we have a possible additions section. So maybe, there that we talked about it, or you may want to elevate it actually to a to-do for 2024. Okay. Okay. So any other questions about summer flounder, scut black sea bass for 2023? 2023 bluefish, you see 10, 11, 12, 13, basically the specifications, recreational management measures, a advisory panel fishery performance report, support of a bluefish management track assessment, and the development of bluefish management uncertainty tool, all completed. Any questions or comments about bluefish? Okay, seeing none, moving on, golden blue line tilefish. Specifications for both gold and blue lines for 2024, we did that. We are going to receive a report in December on our review of the golden tilefish IFQ program. We also have, like all the other species that we're involved with, we have the development of the advisory fishery panel fishery performance reports that were completed. At this meeting, we'll have a review of the private recreational tilefish permitting and reporting program. There's some text there regarding our work with the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council to support the upcoming 2024 blue line tilefish operational assessment. That's in progress. And you can see the note there. We are coordinating, we did coordinate the 2023 golden tilefish survey. That was completed. We'll get a presentation on that particular survey and the results in December. We did support the 2024 golden tilefish research track assessment, and that should be completed. And we have in progress coordination collaboration with various entities to expand the South Atlantic Deepwater Longline Survey into the Mid-Atlantic region. And there's a note there for that as well. Any questions or comments about tilefish? Okay, 2023 activities related to squid, mackerel, butterfish are next. Develop mackerel specifications, 24-25. Longfin squid specifications, 24-26. Review the 23 specifications for Illex. All those were completed. Develop 2024-2025 specs for Illex, completed. Review the 2024 specs for butterfish, 2024 specs for chub mackerel, completed. We had our advisory panel. We have initiated a number of contracts related to squid, including longfin squid biological data collection and aging, supporting a larger project for squid modeling. We have a contract for longfin squid research track assessment support. All those are in progress. Well, the other thing that we did in 2023 related to squid, mackerel, butterfish is that we completed Atlantic mackerel emergency action closure request, and we completed a Illex contract to support Illex ABC setting. Any questions related to squid, mackerel, butterfish for 2023? Peter.
Thanks. I just have one. The three that are completed in progress, contracts initiated, are they with the same contracting company? I mean, it looks like they were done over different years, but.
No, they're all, I think they're all actually different.
Just curiosity, that's all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, in fact, you could probably find the details as to exactly who we're working with in that other document that Mary posted yesterday. Other questions about squid, mackerel, butterfish? Okay, seeing none. Shad River herring, a couple things there. Develop the 2024-2025 river herring and shad cap. That's completed. We have a contract that we initiated regarding shad river herring. It's a data portal. That'll be done in 2025. Any questions on shad river herring? Okay, spiny dogfish, several things there. We have developed 2024 through 2026 specifications completed. We had the advisory panel fishery performance report, supported a management track assessment, and we have work ongoing related to dogfish aging. That'll help basically with future assessments related to dogfish. Any questions related to spiny dogfish? Okay, zipping along here. For Klamath Ocean blog, several things there. Review the 2024 specs, the advisory panel fishery performance report. We have both of those are completed. We have an electronic monitoring project that we're involved with. We have continued to work and will continue to work on the species separation requirements amendment. Talking about that, it relates to 2024. We have a surf clam genetics project with Cornell That's, we expect completion of that particular project in early 2024. Any questions about SERC plans and ocean logs? Science and research, a number of things there. We will review this document, final review of the 2020-2024 research priorities document in December. We have approved our SSC membership. We have outcomes and recommendations from the SSC ecosystem work group that are in progress. We completed our review of the research set-aside program. We have reviewed results and determined potential application of research projects on short-term forecasts of species distributions. We are supporting the 2023 State Space Models Research Track Assessment, which we expect to be peer-reviewed in February of 2024. So that's changed. We continue to coordinate and facilitate the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. It's ongoing. We also had a couple projects here that we initiated, including contract for to supplement the port biological sampling program, as well as a contract to age Mid-Atlantic species. Any questions there about science and research? Ecosystem and ocean planning, several items there. We continue development of the Essential Fish Habitat Amendment. We are continuing to maintain and integrate Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment products, NERA products. We expect to complete the National Fishing Effects Database project. That's ongoing or in progress. We continue to maintain our joint offshore wind page with the New England Council. We continue to develop comments on offshore energy development. Continue to develop those letters, get those submitted. And we will basically look at a comprehensive review and update to the ecosystem approach to fisheries management risk assessment at this meeting. The East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative was completed. We continue to track thread herring exempted fishing permit application and we're developing comments on that as necessary. And we are talking about a policy or process for reviewing EFP applications for newer expanding fisheries as it relates to unmanaged forage amendment, unmanaged forage amendment at this meeting. Any questions or comments about any of those? Then we have a number of general items that include reviewing commercial landings of unmanaged species, participating in a number of council coordination working groups and subcommittees, responding to information for MSC certification, tracking relevant legislation, continuing to participate on marine mammal tick reduction teams, working on sturgeon bycatch. And there's that particular item will be talked about today. And we will also completed our collaboration on the 3-year SBRM report. We expect to have that completed by the end of 2023. In the other items below there, we have completed and developed comments on the draft MIMS climate governance policy. We have coordinated development of comments for the CCC, and we are in the midst of conducting outreach to promote stakeholder awareness of that particular draft policy. I should say that our letter, so we have a letter that we'll talk about relative to CCC. Our particular letter has not been drafted yet. It will be in October. We have developed comments on the AMPR as it relates to those national standards. And we have a RFP out on the street for program review of Council GARFO processes for fishery management action development. Any questions or comments there? Communication and outreach, number of items there, ongoing. All those are ongoing, including continuing to inform and engage stakeholders, conducting outreach to increase stakeholder awareness, work on the council website, developing fact sheets and outreach materials as needed, and continuing our work to improve awareness of and compliance with the private recreational tilefish reporting requirements. You see a note there that there's been an application for an ACC-SP grant, fund coordinate to conduct a variety, even with application improvements and outreach efforts in coordination with Harbor Light. And I'll just move on to the staff wrap up. You can see a number of items there. And then below that, possible additions. The only possible addition that we addressed in 2023 was initiate the amendment to address disapproved portions of the Illex permit amendment. So that's 2023. I went through that very quickly. Certainly, if there's any questions or comments, now would be a good time to bring those up. If not, if there's something that occurs to you later, certainly we can get back to it. But again, I think a very busy year. We still have more things that we need to do before the end of the year. Okay, anything else on 2023 before we move on? Before we move on to 2024, we go through this every year where we talk about what happened the year that we're in. Right? And I just quickly go through this list of all the things that we said we were going to do. And I think it's useful. It's certainly useful to have the document in front of you to look at, just to give you an idea where you can certainly check our to-do list and say, oh yeah, we actually did get that done. But I guess the general question is this the best way to do this? Or would you prefer that I don't even talk about 2023 and say, hey, take a look at that 2023 document. Pat yourself on the back. We did a lot of good work. We're done. Any thoughts there? Well, if you think of anything. Oh, yeah. Adam.
I'm not going to sit here and advocate for not doing it. I would just say that if there is a desire to do something different, what I would suggest is to just have a discussion and highlight those items that were not completed. Things to be completed could just be checked off and tell people, hey, here's the list of everything, but then just limit the scope of this report to the non-completed items with discussion about why, what we need to do moving forward. I'm not going to advocate for skipping this. I do think there's use in it. I think it's a useful reminder for everybody, particularly leading into the next discussion we're going to have. But if there was a desire for change, that would be a recommended way.
You, Michelle?
Yeah, I know it might seem a little, I don't know, repetitive or, hey, we can read this stuff, but I do think it is useful, in particular to highlight some of the things that, especially some of the things that end up getting added during the year that were either not on the list of items to be added, but came up as sort of triage. So I do think it's helpful. I mean, the council and the staff do a tremendous amount of work every year. And I think sometimes, it can be easy to gloss over what actually gets done. So I do think it's a good reminder for ourselves how much effort all of these things require.
You, Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I agree with both Adam and Michelle. I would say that if we were to meet in closed session, which I think this discussion is usually an open session, I think it's fair to spend the time going through the list like you did. It took half an hour, not even. And for the public that are listening, and I think it gives them a good sense of the scope of work that's done in a given year. And I think on top of all of these action items, there's a lot of things like setting up meetings and doing all the other administrative type work that's not even on this list. We have the discussion often where throughout the year we want to add something or we want to initiate some type of new action. And I think this discussion once a year kind of puts all of those new interests into perspective when you think about all the workload that's already there. And it's a good transparent way for the public that doesn't follow along with us at every meeting, reading all the materials like we do, to get a sense. So I would support just maintaining the approach.
Thank you. That was helpful. So, I think one of the important points, and Adam made it, is that 2023 discussion really tees us up for the 2024 discussion. It should take a little bit longer, right? So that's what we're going to do next, is basically look at what staff has put together for 2024 actions and deliverables. And the idea is that we basically agree on a document, a draft document that we can take to the council in December and say, this is what the executive committee thought we should do for 2024. What does the council think about it? So we're going to do that next. Before I get to the actual document on 2024 actions and deliverables, the one additional document I want to call your attention to is the memo to me from Julia on the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocation Amendment. So this is basically detailing why we as the council may want to consider that disapproval. And there's language in there that came from NOAA Fisheries that basically states some of their concerns and how we might proceed with that particular conversation. So when we get to the potential action items for summer planning step black sea bass, you may want to keep this in mind in terms of our discussion and conversation. So with that, let me go back up to the 2024 document. In case you haven't noticed, Mary's keeping up with us by actually posting a list here. So let's talk about summer planning scup and black sea bass first. So basically, as you might expect, been involved with these species for a while. We're going to go through a similar process as we did this year for 2024 in 2024. So we'll be setting 2025, developing, setting 2025 black sea bass specifications. We'll be reviewing the 2025 summer planner and scup specifications. We'll be setting 2025 black sea bass recreational management measures. We'll be reviewing the recreational management measures that we set for 2025 for summer planner and scup. We'll be, as I indicated earlier in our 2023 conversations, continuing our work on the recreational measures setting process framework addendum. So that, remember the name change, same project or same process, but we'll be doing that. We will continue our work on the recreational sector separation and recreational catch accounting amendment. We will have the advisory panel fishery performance reports. We'll continue to support the Black Sea Bass Management Track assessment. We will, this is something that we should talk about, initiate a framework action to consider modifications to commercial scup DRAs, other measures to help reduce scup discards. That would be an initiation. That's something that is a carryover from our work in 2023. Related to that is something that we've already talked about as well, which is there may be a better way to deal with scup discards than GRAs. And that better way may involve modeling and research related to bycatch prediction and avoidance. So that's something that that would be handled through a contract. That would be something that staff would oversee, but certainly not do directly. And then here's the one that I referenced earlier: the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocations. Consider options for addressing disapproved portions of Amendment 3. So a lot there. Full plate certainly related to summer planner scup and black sea bass. What do you think? Questions, comments, concerns? Adam?
What is proposed for us to work on under number 11? You know, going back to the disapproval letter, I think the service provided a lot of information why they disapproved the portions that they did. My recollection of that letter was it didn't provide much in the way of positive advice to the council in terms of here's things, if you did differently, we would cause us to reconsider our decision. Given our experience with Illex, I just don't see where we're going to go with this, quite frankly, unless you have some other ideas or the service has some other ideas about what we could realistically accomplish
other than spend another 12 to 18 months working on something that's likely going to leave us in the same place.
Thanks, Adam. Good points. And certainly that's why, we're talking about this today to see exactly what we could potentially do with Black Sea bass allocations. Couple of things. We had a disapproved amendment, partially disapproved amendment. The language that relates to your particular question is captured in the memo from Julia to me, basically saying that, hey, if you guys, the council, want to deal with this again, these are the things that you need to consider, right? And basically, NIMS has indicated what those are there, and those are things that we could address if, in fact, the council wanted to do. And they do point out that a simple revision of the document not going to work. So, basically, you're going to have to do some work. As Julie indicates in our last paragraph, this is where staff is. Basically, if the council wants to, we can work with NOAA Fisheries and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission to consider potential options for addressing the disapproved aspects of 23. I don't know what those are at this point, but we could explore it. One of the things that we should consider, or we should remember, is that those allocations that are currently currently being used by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission that were in that particular amendment there's a sunset provision associated with them that says in 2026 or 2027, these will be revisited. So I think there was a 5-year clause that applied to those. So we're anticipating that 2020 and 2025, 2026, at least the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission will start thinking about changes to those allocations. And now's the time for us as a council to consider how we may want to be involved in those particular changes, if in fact that's going to happen. And I would guess there will be some serious conversations in the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission relative to those state-by-state allocations. So again, it's up to you all. It's up to the council. If you think this is a waste of time and rather not even have this on our list of things for 2024, we can take it off the list. If you want to have it on there so that staff can continue to work with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, GARFO, to explore possibilities, then we should leave it on the list. Hopefully that helps, Adam. Adam.
So I think that if we are going, so I'll just simply say right now, I would not be in favor of keeping this where it is. I'm not sure it belongs in what we've referred to as below the line and possible additions. This seems like something we put in some placeholder to maybe come back to in 2025 or somewhere down the road when those discussions in advance of the ASMFC work would then be reconsidered. I'm certainly not opposed to staff working with the commission and GARFO to get ideas for how to fix things. Again, I'm just going back to what we've learned in the last 12 months here, and my experience tells me GARFO needs to lead that discussion. If they think there's a way forward, my experience is they've been very good at offering that to us in the past. And in the absence of them having offered that in the disapproval letter, I don't have a lot of confidence that it's anything more than us spinning our wheels, quite frankly.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I agree with Adam to some extent in that it doesn't seem like this is going to be very fruitful in the immediate term. I mean, I was disappointed in that decision. I fully think that those allocations should be within the council's fishery management plan. And I agree with Adam. I think that I would definitely support staff maintaining conversations or being involved in conversations with the regional office and with ASMFC to, think about maybe it's on a slow path right now, just given the sunset, about what those options might be, because I do think the council's going to want to weigh in on those discussions, and we're going to want to be very involved in those discussions when they start happening, which, as you said, is probably likely going to be in 2025, just given that sunset. So maybe it's just how it's worded. Maybe if we change the wording to have this be, maintain council staff discussions with the regional office and ASMFC, whatever, I'm not going to wordsmith on the fly here, but perhaps, a change in language might address and, what Adam has raised and, be a little bit more accurate with regard to the actual work that would be going on next year.
Other comments? Eric?
Talk anyway, probably, that's fine. It's not on this topic, it's on another topic. If you want to finish up with this, I just have a clarifying question for you, Dr. Moore.
Before we get to Eric's question, comment, anything else on this particular issue? So hearing comments from Adam and Michelle, I think, and not hearing a lot of like, hey, we really need to do this. Let's do this. Let's strike it from the list, understanding that it's still going to be there, obviously. And we'll have the lower level discussions with GARFO and ASMFC over the year and basically keep it at that level, but not elevate it to an actual action item for 2024. Comfortable with that? Okay, so we'll do that. So everyone knows, Mary's keeping track of our conversation today, obviously, and it's going to be taking that off the list. So that would be something that the full council wouldn't see in December. Okay. Other questions, comments, Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. I know in the first part of your presentation, you mentioned in December, you're going to get a presentation on mesh size and with the big three. And I wasn't sure whether or not you commented about that. I was a little distracted by the purple background when you were talking, so I was trying to follow you along pretty good. But is that something that needs to be included specifically, or does it fit into item 9? Or I'm assuming you're going to get the presentation and then decide what to do with it. So just like to know how that might work. Thank you.
So it's a little confusing because there's a lot of stuff going on relative to mesh size and exemptions and that kind of thing. So what we planned is for a conversation in December related to mesh size and the exemption programs for summer flounder, right? So that'll be completed in 2023. So that was on the 2023 list. Then our conversations that we had in August, we talked about and heard about the GRAs, and basically decided that in order for us to proceed, we needed more information, and that would be a topic that we would consider in 2024 with the potential of a framework basically that would modify the way that those GRAs operate. And there were some comments made relative to GRAs that suggested that in fact there may be a better way to deal with scup bycatch. That would involve modeling, some research, and that would take place in 2020 as well. But to your point, if in fact in December we hear something relative to mesh size, or we hear something relative to those exemption programs, we don't have anything, I think, on the list that would change those, right? It's not below it either. So I think if in fact we anticipate that might happen, it might be something that we add to possible additions below. Anna?
Yeah, and if Kylie, I think she's online, she could speak more to this, but the summer flounder mesh size exemptions is something we can deal with specifications. So in December, we'll have a conversation with the council. We also plan on talking to industry. We're planning for a meeting in November to have these conversations. So that's something that could be handled separately from that framework action.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Adam?
We done with that?
I think we've answered it, unless. Okay, Adam?
Does the work that's ongoing with the recreational demand model and the decision support tool, in your opinion, fall under item 5 or some combination of 2, 3, and 4? Or is there a need to break that out as its own item? I see the decision support tool specifically as something that is likely going to get a lot more of attention, certainly for staff around the table and potentially the public as well moving forward.
I think from our, at least from our perspective, that what's covered when we talk about this, number 5. But if you don't think so, if you want it to be explicitly stated somewhere, we could certainly, I'm looking down the list here in terms of, is anything else in science or general that would relate to it. I think when we talked about it at the staff level, basically our understanding is that we'll continue to obviously support that tool, work with the group that you're involved with related to that tool, and that'll be part of number 5.
So I think just what to keep in mind is, my opinion is this is something that's kind of flying below the radar. And the idea that there is potential for a cloud-based solution for certainly the state level biologists to go into, have access to and tweak measures and see outcomes, potentially for that to be publicly accessible somewhere down the road. I just think it's something that shouldn't be flying below the radar. So I would just encourage staff to be keeping an eye out for continuing ways to provide that information to this body as well as the public. The implementation plan may not be the right way to do that. But again, I see that as something that will be very different, potentially very impactful, and shouldn't be flying below the radar.
Other questions or comments? And to your point, Adam, I agree. Anything else that we need to do with Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass for 2024? So just to recap, we deleted 11. Okay, moving on, Bluefish. 3 things there, actually 3, 4, 5 things there, because we have the review of the 2025 Bluefish specs. We'll have a review of the recreational management measures for 2025, have the advisory panel fishery performance reports, and items 5 and 6, and we talked about this before, will not only address Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass, but also Bluefish. Any questions or comments about Bluefish? Okay, seeing none. A number of proposed actions and deliverables for golden and blue line tilefish. So number 15 has to be modified. And it relates to the fact that although we'll be looking at or developing 2025, 2026, and 2027 golden tilefish specifications in 2024, we'll only be developing 2025 blue line tilefish specifications. That relates to how the stock assessment's proceeding for those particular species. So it would say 2025 to 2027 golden tilefish specifications, and the revision would then have a 2025 blue line tilefish specification. We'd also be developing our advisory panel fishery performance reports for those species. Like this year, we get an update on the private recreational tilefish permitting and reporting program. We would continue our outreach to improve compliance with those reporting requirements. We'll support a blue line tilefish operational assessment. We'll support a golden tilefish research track assessment. We'll support a golden tilefish management track assessment. And we'll continue our involvement with the South Atlantic Deepwater Longline Survey. Questions, comments about that? Adam?
So Dewey's not here, so I'll carry the torch here for him. On number 18, I'm just not sure outreach in itself is going to achieve our goal of compliance with private recreational reporting. So I do wonder if there is something more that we could put on here that suggests that we around the table are going to do more to consider ways to improve compliance as opposed to just having the staff do more outreach. I don't have those specific action items to offer here today, but I would offer for consideration some additional language that goes beyond outreach on this item and would be open to that conversation if there's anyone else that supports that thought as well.
Thank you, Adam. Scott? And then Eric.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Adam on this one. I actually brought this up at a couple of local Maryland and Ocean City meetings that tilefish reporting is lacking pretty severely, and hate to see down the road that the lack of reporting turns into stricter regulations. So I'm all in favor for putting something in the language that says we'll work on some sort of way to get the reporting in line. Wes and I were speaking at dinner last night, and there was an HMS survey that was done that showed way more catch in the blue line tile fishery than NOAA's reporting right now. So even surveys or something like that might be part of it, but definitely need to improve that.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. I don't have to channel Dewey on this. I've been saying it before. Why don't you just enforce it? I mean, people are going to find out in a big hurry when they start getting busted.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, and I'm wondering also if we started this in 2020. We're on, this is the completion of year 3 of the reporting, and I'm trying to recall if there's anything in that amendment that has sort of a general review of the overall effectiveness of the program. I mean, that's sort of what Adam's getting at here, but do we need to formalize that we might, have a review of this program and perhaps consider, additional measures or options, based on that review. I mean, there are potentially other ways to go about, getting this information, rather than requesting people sign up for a permit. They may or may not go tilefish fishing, so that accounts for some of the lack of reporting. It seems like this is related to, could be related to some of the efforts on do not fish reports, but, maybe we consider something different down the road where, there's sort of a random selection of folks who are required to report. I don't know, but, maybe an evaluation of the effectiveness of the program after some time period rather than continuing to have the same item on our implementation list year after year.
So before I go to you, Jason, there is, a possibility in terms of the language. Certainly, there's other things that we may want to consider beyond outreach. Adam's point, Scott's point, right? We have a law enforcement committee that's certainly neat to talk about this particular topic. There's other ways that we could also address it through modifications of the plan, as I think you're implying, Michelle. So we could change the language here to make it more general and say, for example, I'm open to the suggestions of increase awareness or increase compliance with, something like that. Just drop the outreach part of it so that it's not limiting just to that particular And maybe that would help us in terms of what we want to do with that particular topic in 2024. Does that make sense, Adam?
So I'm in favor of including an evaluation language here, and what that might look like, understanding that if we drastically expand the scope of this bullet, it's going to affect other items. But I think in my mind, some evaluation might include the law enforcement committee working with the Tilefish committee and the AP to generate some type of report that says what's going on, what are areas for improvement here. And I think that can be done without burdening staff, would be my hope. So I think that would be my vision for this at this point for 2024.
You, Adam? Jason?
Just a bit of history on this item. Originally, the council, the way it set it up was a fish had to be reported before the fish left the boat or the boat left the water. So any tilefish on the dock would have already had to have been in the system. Because of various implementation concerns, the way it got implemented was 24 hours, which pretty much removes an opportunity for effective enforcement because the fish are gone. And there are a variety of reasons why the service implemented that way in terms of the burden on people, in terms of reporting technology, et cetera. But the original amendment did try to have I think it was a pretty strong enforcement kind of potential there. But because of how it got implemented, we lost a bit of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I certainly support what Adam said, and in looking at this, I like the idea of learning from what's already occurred through a report of some kind to further our understanding of the where we may have gone wrong, where enforcement is not being applied enough to get fishermen to comply with this rule. So I think that I wanted to put it out there on the record that yes, I definitely support moving forward with something more than just outreach, but I also wanted to make sure that folks around the table and the public understand, this is a first crack at trying to deal with recreational landings through a reporting process. And we hear all the time, especially those of us that are with state agencies, the simple fix is just get fishermen to report, right? Well, it's a lot more challenging than that. And we can see from this, which is, I look at blue line tilefish or the tilefish reporting, it's a small niche fishery. I mean, it's not anything like some of the other recreational fisheries we manage. And so this will be a kind of a wake up call, I think, for managers as well as the public. If we're identifying errors or we're identifying areas of improvement, I think that would be helpful for the future as we expand this type of work into other fisheries like flounder and sea bass and striped bass and other things like that. So just wanted to put that out there. Thanks, Chris.
Any other comments? So, Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to express my support for, Adam's suggestion for modification of the language and like the level of effort from staff on this item for 2024.
So thank you. Before I go to you, Mike, I think one way to think about this is exactly the way that Adam presented it. Be to modify the language to say something like evaluate private recreational tilefish reporting requirements to increase compliance. Or just get that word evaluation in there, and then that's more overarching, so that we could then reach out to our law enforcement committee, get them involved, continue our outreach efforts to increase reporting, compliance, and whatever else we think about as it relates to changes to EFM. So folks are all okay with that. We'll make that language change. Mike?
Yeah, so I'm fine with the language change. I think, one thing though to consider in this evaluation is where are those resources coming from? It's easy to look at tilefish rec reporting in isolation and say, oh, we need to do more. But doing more means we're doing less of something else. Every hour that enforcement agents are enforcing this, they're not enforcing something else. So in that evaluation, I think we need to have an honest consideration of what we're going to deprioritize if we're prioritizing tilefish rec reporting.
You, Joe?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I was just wondering too, in this process, if we could maybe take a look at some success stories, if there are any, from other mandatory, because I think when we started this, we were hearing stuff like, at that time, HMS, which had been around for quite some time, had maybe a 40% compliance, or something like that. But if there are lessons learned, maybe that can be plugged in here.
Yeah. No, good idea, but I don't think there are many. Anna knows more about it than I do. Anna, are there anything that?
Yeah, HMS has a problem with compliance with the similar reporting requirements. They're also put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to expand that reporting requirements to more of their HMS species. So they are trying to think of an outreach campaign or ways to improve compliance through multiple efforts. And just to note, we'll kind of dive into this topic more tomorrow when we get our update from GARFO. But staff has been putting forth some effort. We put in a proposal to ACCSP to get some money to do additional outreach, or we could change that to do some evaluation in coordination with Harbor Lights. They are the app developer for EFIN. We're also hoping to improve metadata collection through that effort. So collecting information of where are people reporting, how many times they open the app a month or weekly or however. We also have been talking to a contractor to come up with some ideas. So those are all options for moving forward. So as you guys, have dinner tonight, maybe you could think more about this. And this is a conversation we can revisit under that agenda item, because I do think this is an important conversation.
Thank you, Hannah. Anything else on tilefish, gold or blue line? Make that word change, wording change for 18. Moving along here, squid, mackerel, butterfish, number of items there. Our 25 to 26 butterfish specifications will have to be developed. Review the 2025 mackerel, chub mackerel, long squid, Illex squid specifications. We'll have reports, advisory panel reports. We'll support the butterfish management track assessment. We'll support the longfin squid research track assessment. Continue supporting longfin squid biological sampling, squid modeling project as well. Any comments, questions about squid, mackerel, butterfish? One thing I should note, and we've been doing it pretty well, but if there's things that you think pertain to these species, any of the species that we're talking about, that need to be added to the list, something that staff forgot or something that you think is important, now would be the time to bring this up as we go through. So anything else related to squid, mackerel, butterfish? Adam?
We need a temporary placeholder for the old specifications that we're going to do, hoping that we complete it. But if something happens that we don't get it done by December, that we can have it already at that point.
So I think keep that in mind, but I would suggest that we be optimistic and say we're going to wrap that up. However, we get to December, we're looking at this draft again. We say things didn't go as well as we thought in October. Spend some time on it, and we could add this. Other questions or comments about squid, mackerel, butterfish? Seeing none. Shad and river herring, couple things there. This data portal that Jason has talked about before. Continue our support of that, as well as avoidance modeling and research related to bycatch river herring species. Any questions or comments about those? Spiny dogfish. Review 2025 spiny dogfish specs. Have our advisory panel fish performance report. Continue to support the spiny dogfish aging project. We'll have a spiny dogfish aging workshop. Basically make sure that everyone's on the same page as it relates to aging of dogfish spines. We hope to take final action on a joint framework action, reduce sturgeon bycatch in the monkfish and spiny dogfish. Something to talk about today. Questions or comments about spiny dogfish? Surf clam and ocean quahog. We'll review the 2025 specs for those two species. We'll have the advisory panel fishery report. We'll support the surf clam management tract assessment. Continue to support the electronic monitoring project as well as the surf clam genetics project. And we will continue our work on the surf clam and ocean species separation requirements amendment about this week as well. There, questions or comments related to surf clams, ocean quahogs? Peter.
Sorry, apologies. We received a letter from the any action taken in 2024. Rest that or see action or how do we proceed?
I would turn to Garpo for that. Mike.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So we received that letter from the FDA today or yesterday that just went into the supplemental documents, and the agency sent it out also. Do we need to put something on here for 2024 that we have to develop for the council, or is it, let's see?
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to be developing a proposed rule outside of the council process under our 305D secretarial authority. But certainly we'll be looking for input from both councils as we work through that process. So at least in terms of, meeting planning and agenda planning for next year, presumably in the late spring, I would expect we'll ask for time on the agenda to present our proposed rule and solicit feedback from the council on that rule.
Other questions or comments for surf clam and ocean quahog? Seeing none. Moving on, science and research. So we will have to establish new research priorities for those 5 years, because the last 5 years we have 2025 to 2029. Council research priorities, we'll be talking about that in 2024. We will have an update to the SSC's overfishing limit coefficient of variation guidance document. We will continue to support our biological sampling, port biological sampling projects, as well as the aging project. And we'll continue to coordinate, facilitate, NTAP, Northwest Trawl Advisory Panel. Questions or comments there? Mike?
Thanks, Chris. Just curious, under 45, are you expecting put additional financial resources towards that contract, or you just mean continuing the existing work?
So we are in ongoing conversations with the contractor, the science center, related to exactly how long that sampling will occur based on the contract that we currently have. And it looks like, based on what we know now, that the sampling will occur through 2024. So the short answer is no. We don't expect to add any additional resources to that. That's something, by the way, that we'll be talking about at the NRCC meeting as well. Other questions or comments about science and research? Ecosystem and ocean planning habitat. We will continue to manage the offshore wind webpage. And that's been an important resource for a number of folks, and we'll make sure that that's up to date with all the latest wind energy development information. Certainly, it's something, and I think folks know this, it's a joint project between both Mid-Atlantic, which has worked very well. We'll have continued to develop council comments on habitat and fishery issues related to offshore energy development. This is something that we've had in our implementation plans for a couple of years now, several years now. And those are all the letters that Julia and others work on to basically comment on existing or proposed projects. We will have the 2024 Ecosystem Approach to Fisheries Management Risk Assessment Report. We'll continue to support the National Fishing Effects Database Project. Continue to work on our Omnibus Essential Fish Habitat Amendment. Continue to maintain and integrate the NERA products that Tori has been actively involved with, Jessica. And depending on how things go, it looks like we'll be looking at a red herring accepted fishing permit application review. Questions, comments on ecosystem, ocean planning, habitat? Next category is general. Believe it or not, we have to do our strategic plan again because it's up 2024. So 2024 is the last year of our second 5-year strategic plan. So very excited that in fact we're doing another one, 2025 to 2029. So we'll be working with the council to get that done next year. It's time again to reappoint our advisory panels. So that'll be an action item for us in 2024. We will, like every year, have an update, like every year since I can't even remember how many years we've been doing this now, 4 or 5 years. I'll have an update on commercial landings of unmanaged species. There's one slightly different flavor this year, which is a conversation that we had last time this topic came up, which is consider those landings thresholds. So that means basically like what amount of landings trigger serious consideration by the council as it relates to an unmanaged forage species. So that'll be a little bit different. Staff are involved with a number of working groups and subcommittees, and there's a list there of the ones that we're involved with now, the Council Coordination Committee. We'll continue our participation on the marine production teams, protected resources working groups. Continue to support anything related to MSC certification and audits as requested. And we will continue to track legislative issues and develop comments if we're requested. Not allowed a lot. Questions or comments about any of that? Michelle?
Yeah, I apologize, I've really been keeping track of this, but out of curiosity, is there another council member ongoing development workshop? No works like being planned or considered at this point?
As I remember it, the plan was to do one every other year. So it would be, just did one in 23, right? This year, yeah, so it'll be 2025. Yeah, Mary's on that, so. Other questions or comments about that section? So the next section is new. We haven't had a climate resilience and governance section in our implementation plan. It's been embedded in other things, but this year we do. So 62 through 64 relate to that particular topic. So this first one is a program review for fishery management action development. It is a ongoing activity in 2024 based on successful contract in 23 related to that particular topic. And that topic's there because that was something that was identified in the scenario plan exercise that we recently completed. Basically deals with how to increase efficiencies and effectiveness of council operations to make us more climate ready. And so that'll be ongoing. There's another one there as well. Evaluation of council committee structure, use and decision making. There's an item identified in the scenario planning document, basically in collaboration with the other East Coast councils. And that potential action item, if you want to cross-reference it, is G. The next one is still a little uncertain, but we do know that money has been set aside for council proposal development and project management as it relates to money associated with the Inflation Reduction Act. Money associated with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we know that there's going to be an initial allocation to 8 regional councils of $375,000. That $375,000 would be used very specifically for projects related to climate change and fisheries. Don't know the specifics as to exactly when we'd get that money, how we apply for that money. There's still a lot of, I would say a lot, but there's certainly some uncertainty related to how that's going to happen. Initially, we thought that this was something that we'd be applying for, because we have to apply for it by the end of September. That didn't happen. There's also another chunk of money that will be allocated for the councils. It will involve a competition between the councils for another $17 million related to climate change and fisheries projects. Again, there's uncertainty related to exactly how that's going to happen, how that's all going to work. But we do know it's going to involve work of the staff once we get tells us exactly how it's going to happen. And it's likely that will involve, council committees, especially the Research Steering Committee, the SSC, help us figure out exactly how we might want to apply. What kind of projects do we want to apply for that money? So this is basically on there because we know it's going to happen, but I can't give you a lot of details at this point. So with that, questions, comments about climate resilience and governance? Yeah, Maureen.
Thanks, Chris. The money amounts that you stated was 375K and I think 17 million. Was that for the total councils or is that per council?
The 375 is per council. The 17 million is for whoever successfully competes for the money out of the 8 regional councils. No, well, I guess potentially one council could get all of it, but unlikely. Unlikely. I'm sure NIMS in their review of the applications will think about as part of the review spreading that money around. So we will, but we're not going to just get it. We have to compete. Some proposals that actually make sense. Michelle.
What's the time frame within which those funds would need to be expended?
So the way I understand it, and Mike can help me if I say it incorrectly, is that we would get this money just like we get our grant to operate. And the money, I understand it, would have to be spent by 26. So you basically extend over that time. The applications for the money would occur early 2024 based on the time. So yeah, so that's it. I think I'm correct in that time frame. Sunny.
Can't hear you on the line.
Yeah, I gotta push it.
Yeah, thank you. Who makes the rules and who decides who gets the money? You probably said that, but I missed it.
Yes. Yeah, no fisheries. Additional comments on that section? Climate resilience and governance. Okay, seeing none. Communication and outreach. Have 3 items there. Ongoing communication activities to support understanding and awareness of the council. Outreach campaigns to increase stakeholder awareness. Council website improvements. So those are similar to action items that we've got. Questions, comments about those? Next one, staff wrap up on completed actions. So if there are any outstanding specification packages that we need to work on, we'll work on them. It was done in early 2024. Any questions or comments about that? So this next section is usually the one that's the most interesting when it comes to the conversations that we have at this table. That is possible additions. And possible additions is there basically because we do think that there is a possibility that things could change over the year. So as we get involved in 2024, something doesn't happen that we thought was going to happen and it comes off the list. Find ourselves with some additional time, resources being staff time, basically to deal with these particular issues. These are the ones, these possible additions are ones that we've called from previous documents. Some of them have been on the possible addition list for a while. If you look at the possible addition list that we have for 2023, we actually got to one of them, Illex. So this is actually an important section. These are not in any priority order. It's just a list, possible additions. So with that, I'll give you, I'll go through the list, and then certainly if there's other things that you think to add to the list, let me. If there's things on this list that you'd like to move up to the other sections, then we can talk about that as well. So 69 is comments on EFP applications for forage amendment ecosystem component species. Next one is action to authorize an experimental Atlantic surf clam fishery in the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area. Next one is development of spatial management options for Atlantic surf clam open water aquaculture in the New York Bight and Central Atlantic. Next one is framework to allow quota transfer between commercial and recreational sectors for summer flounder, scupped black sea bass. The last one is one that we've kicked around for a while. Action to implement did not fish reports for commercial for hire and private fish permit. So you don't have to do anything. You could say, it's fine, these possible additions make sense to me. Leave them under possible additions, or again, there's things that move, now's the time to talk about them. Comments or questions relative to that section? Adam?
Given that under the ecosystem item, we have the expectation of redfin herring comments, and the fact that we can't anticipate an EFP application in all cases, I'm wondering if it just makes more sense to replace that redfin herring comment with what we have here is 69, which would take care of the threadfin issue explicitly, and then has that for anything else that we would need to comment on as well.
I think that's a good idea. Questions, comments about that? Let's see, staff. See anybody indicating any problem with that, Peter?
No problem with that at all. I was just wondering, does it need to be because of staff time, budget for that? Because doesn't NIMS come to us and solicit for comments anyhow when there's an EF that affects our region?
They do. This has been the ongoing conversation we've had this year relative to the process as to how we respond these particular applications. So it started with the threadfin discussion, right? But it also now has expanded to the other species that might be harvested that are included in unmanaged forage management. So I think, again, from my perspective, just moving it up and placing the one that we have for threadfin, this more general one, is appropriate. I do know that Julia, who has been more actively involved than I've been with both those topics, is online. Julia, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, thanks. I think the thinking here
Hold on,
with including it.
Julia, hold on for a second.
Wow.
Okay, try again, Julia.
How's this?
Still a little out. Hold on.
Better? Should I talk quieter?
Yeah, yeah, like step about 10 feet back.
Okay, how's this?
Too far. A little louder.
How about this?
We can deal with that. That's good. Let's deal with that.
Okay, I think the theory behind having them separate was that we know, or we're like pretty sure that the threadfin herring one is coming and we can plan for that. But we don't know if we'll get other applications for other EFPs. And then if that happens, we don't know how big of a lift that would be. And we'll talk about it more tomorrow in terms of the process for the forage amendment species, that there's the draft process has multiple levels of review by the committee and the SSC and the council. So the thinking was that if we get, for example, like a few EFP applications that we weren't anticipating, that could be a big workload. So by keeping this one here on possible additions, it's kind of indicating that we might have time to get to it, or we might not, depending on how many applications we get, which might be 0, it might be multiple, to just kind of explain that, like, as time allows, we will work on those, but acknowledging that the review for the forage amendment species is kind of a multi-step process, and we have to balance that with other staff priorities.
Thanks, Julia. Other comments or questions as to how to deal with it? Michelle.
Yeah, no, I appreciate Julia's perspective, and we did chat about this at the committee level. I mean, I'm comfortable either way, leaving it, combining it as Adam had suggested, just to make sure we have an item, a standing item for this versus leaving it separate because we have some level of certainty about the threadfin hearing application. I think another thing that the committee discussed that I was going to raise in the context of implementation plan, this might be a little soon, but we also chatted about, there's reviewing these exempted fishing permits, but then there are sort of next steps for follow-up management actions if the council decides that a new or expanded fishery is appropriate. And so perhaps some consideration of development of a follow-on process or policy for new and emerging fisheries more broadly. I think that could dovetail well with some of the climate change scenario planning priorities that have been noted. So I guess I would maybe leave it to staff to try to wordsmith that a little bit, but it might be something to add to that. Possible additions to consider and maybe keep track of.
So just so I understand, Michelle, you're suggesting that don't combine 69 with the threadfin one?
I don't have any I don't have strong opinions either way. I'm supportive of Adam's suggestion, understand that we have some certainty about the threadfin herring. So that's one thing. And then separate from that was just potential addition of another item for the council to consider, what are those subsequent steps with respect to development of a process or a policy for, if the council decides to take a follow-on management action to provide for a new or expanded fishery. And I think there's some overlap between doing something like that and I think some of the climate change scenario planning priority actions. And that's where I guess I would look to you or staff. I'm not prepared to wordsmith something right now, but to add, that might be an item for the possible additions to kind of keep in the background as we move forward.
Now I got it. Thank you. Maureen?
Thank you, Chris. I seem to have a space in my head regarding the EFPs and the review council. I'm aware of many people who've gotten EFPs that weren't brought before the council for review. And I just sort of wanted to know, I realized that the thread herring one was kind of a new topic or a new issue, but how is it decided whether that EFP should come before the council to review it? Now, after the council has reviewed it and come to a decision, the last decision though rests with GARPO. So if you could sort of just explain the steps to me so that I would know which EFPs come before the council for review, and then how does the council's decision rest in what happens with GARPO?
That's a good question, comments. This is very specific. This consideration of EFPs as it relates to the unmanaged forage amendment, species that are within that amendment. So typically, the council doesn't review EFP applications. There's a lot, and there's lots of EFP applications you all never see unless you want to. You go to our letter section on our website and see the letters that I basically send to GARPO saying, no problem. Yeah, this is reasonable to us, and off it goes. This particular case, excuse me, dealing with EFP applications relate to unmanaged forage. So that's the limitation, that's the difference. Does that make sense? So it would only be under those circumstances that we talk about the process procedure that we've been working on. Applies that.
Would the council be interested in EFPs that were focused on perhaps our quota managed species as well, or was it just because of the interest in the forage species at that time that the EFP came before the council?
It was the latter. Just because of this concern related to threadfin, we started talking about this. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris is, I agree with everything Chris has said. I think, anytime we get an EFP application that comes in for review, if it's unique and potentially significant in its, in its potential for future work, particularly if that future work would depend on council action, we always sort of reserve the right to send it to Chris and say, hey, we'd really like the council to weigh in on this before we make a decision. Most EFPs, as Chris said, are really routine, 15-day comment period. Chris, staff just do a quick review, no issues, concerns, we move forward. Thread herring was, again, it was unique, it was fairly broad, far-reaching. It had implications for development of a new fishery under the forage amendment process. So we wanted to engage, make sure the council was fully engaged before we approved something that, for example, didn't collect the information that the council would need to take to consider a management action. We've done something similar with the New England Council on the habitat management area and the surf clam experiments that have been proposed, where we've really engaged directly with the New England Council on those EFPs before making decisions. So I think it can be both, but in the case of the forage, I think it's, and as I said, the council is going to be discussing tomorrow a new EFP policy process that would apply only to forage amendment.
Other questions or comments? Eric?
Somebody explain to me why 70 is on. It's even possible to get.
So this is actually something that's been on our list for a couple years. And it's on the list because the surf clan folks have asked. We have indicated, Jessica specifically in a number of memos indicated problems associated with this particular ask, how it would work. But we left it on there because, again, they asked that we put it on the list. So Surf Clan Ministry, obviously, as you know, very interested in this particular topic. Push. There's very little that we, from my perspective, this council can do relative to that particular item. If I misstated that, certainly Garpo or to Mr. Chairman of the New England Council, how we deal with it.
I will say it's unique and it's right. That's all I'm going to say. I appreciate the answer that you put on the record.
Other questions, comments? So let's go back to 69. So thinking about it out loud to some extent, if we this year develop an EFT process procedure for how to deal with the issue, and before someone says, hey, we have a species that fits criteria, council to get involved, we would have to, part of our process of procedures. So I understand Julia's point. You have a specific ask related to thread fin, but there's an unknown. We don't know what else could pop up in 20. So I think if you go, Adam, to your point, know that we're going to be on. We know at this point, but I'm not sure what else we're going to be doing. It's fully indicated why we put it on possible additions. So with all that said, I don't have any problem making it specific species thread fin. And again, we would have to deal with other species if in fact they came to the attention and we need to.
And I think it's that fact that it's incumbent upon us to deal with them, which supports moving it out of possible additions and further up, in my opinion, because we know if something comes before us, we would have to do it.
Michelle.
So we can move it up and then just put a parens, e.g. Redfin hearing application. Have that specific one to deal with.
Perfect. Went okay with that? So we're taking care of 69, talked about 70. Anything else on that list that we need to talk about? Specifically, anything that we'd like to move up? Or is there anything else that you'd like to add to the list that we forgot? Adam.
In my mind, historically, things that are in possible additions are there because it's something we've talked about as a council that we would like to do, but just haven't found the staff time to do so. Or is something that the public or some other entity has repeatedly suggested to us that we should be doing. Or is something that staff has identified as something we should have on our radar. So just as I look at the remainder of these 71, 72, and 73, I think it would just be helpful to either have the discussion today or have some support at the December full council meeting for which of those reasons, why are these still on the list or some other rationale that we want to give if it falls outside the bounds of what I've suggested as reasons I've thought of as why they wind up on this list.
Thank you, Adam. So that's an accurate recap of how things have ended up on the possible addition list. The overriding concern are the resources that are available to do additional work, right? So basically, we looked at all the other things that we plan for. Those represent a full plate. So we talked about this in the past. Full plate with a little bit of wiggle room, right? So we know that we're going to have to adapt in 2020. There's things that are going to change. We're going to have to, react to something. So we have that in mind. But when we look at the possible addition list, it's exactly what you said. About the reasons why those things appear on the list. Occasionally, over time, over the last 5-7 years, however long it's been, that we've had things on the addition list. They do move up. They do represent things that we need to think about maybe for 2025 or 2026. But to your very specific ask for December, I think we can still. So we'll do that. Other questions or comments for possible additions? Mike.
So I just am noting, I'm not sure if Reed mentioned this, but New England Council is considering a number of proposals 2024 related to Monkfish, that if those were to move forward, they would presumably Atlanta Council to jointly be working on those actions.
So like what? What kind of actions are we talking about relative to Monkfish? Are they RSA issues? Are they very specific specification issues?
Yeah, so I'm looking at what was presented last week at New England Council. There is an action to improve the Monkfish RSA program, further considering the recommendations of the RSA working group. That would be related to how days at sea, RSA days at sea are allocated versus giving weight instead of days at sea. An action to define and reduce latency of Monkfish permits. Just some more general Monkfish actions related to the interaction with the skate fishery. So just at least 3 or 4 things that, again, they haven't been adopted comment, but they're at least on the potential list.
Well, I know we're going to talk about Monkfish and Dogfish here shortly. Get into it a little bit then. But I can't remember. See, I can't remember everything. Mostly my own name, 3/4 of the time. So, but we had discussions in New England about projects that would be across the 2 councils in regards to the IRA money. And it's been said that encouraging that type of proposal, winner. So just keep that in mind as we freak out about it. There is a possibility that we can have councils on one project, and that is a more palatable way to get instead of argument with our other 6 councils.
So yeah, so we have the IRA topic embedded in our plan, and we expect that there's going to be, as indicated earlier, a lot of staff time devoted to that. I have heard about that, basically proposals that involve all the East Coast councils may be better received than individual council proposals. So again, that'll involve coordination, the New England Council, perhaps the South Atlantic Council on that. So yeah, I think I understand that. Monkfish thing, I don't think relates to that money, but potentially it could, I guess. But I think in terms of what we do with Monkfish, adding a possible addition here would be a good idea, given that list that Mike read would involve some staff time as it relates to in coordination with the New England Council beyond things. So we'll add that, if everyone agrees, we'll add that to the list as possible addition. Since we don't really know at this point exactly what New England's going to do with Monkfish. It's on your implementation list for 2024, but it's not entirely certain as to exactly how we would be involved or what those things would be.
Considering I can't recall, I would say yes to these. Maybe somebody will help me before the day's over, like Mr. Hughes, perhaps.
Peter.
Thanks. The new management council ended last Thursday afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That priority discussion was the last agenda item. There were a number of priorities added to the list. The new list, I haven't been able to find it online, not available. But they will, the way that they operate, it will then go executive committee ranking. Some items will fall off the list, some will find this isn't there yet.
So given that, I think in the conversation with Eric, I think it would be appropriate to put a Monkfish topic here, see what happens. Talk about it again in December if we have exactly what's going on with Monkfish. Decide how best to handle it then.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Moving to one of the, well, as long as you can hear me, I usually speak kind of loud. In looking at these, number 70. So can someone remind me, probably know this, but I'm having a difficult time remembering, first of all, when this was placed on the list. And then since we don't have an aquaculture FM, how do we justify the time spent working towards developing spatial management for aquaculture purposes, even though it is, I assume here it's for surf clams, and we do surf clams. So is there any justification for how we spend our time and resources on aquaculture, development of aquaculture?
Thank you for that. So that's why it's on possible additions, because there are concerns related to the specific topics as you just discussed. But there have been more recent conversations within the surf plan committee on those topics, and I'll turn to Jessica if you can hear me, and if you comment, now would be a good time.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. So this topic was added to the list last year at the request of members of the surf clam industry. They indicated at the time there was a proposal that was circulating that had gone to BOEM about potential for aquaculture mitigation for impacts of wind farms on that fishing industry and its landings. So it was added last year. It is on the list again this year. And what we anticipate as staff, where we really need is staff to take some time to follow up with Chris Scalacci and the aquaculture folks at Garfo, because there is a short-term project that Rutgers and Daphne Monroe are doing to do sort of proof of concept, just a small-scale research project in the Mid-Atlantic region offshore to look at potential for offshore aquaculture and how surf clams grow and how they do offshore. But in the longer term, if this item were to be taken up by BOEM as a potential for mitigation, and there's a desire to ramp up aquaculture to a very large scale, like what was proposed in the mitigation proposal, I think it was something like 10% of landings could be replaced by aquaculture. There may be some implications to management. You know, it could have impacts to the stock assessment. It could have impacts to a survey. If the survey is out and randomly selects a site and happens to sample aquaculture, open water aquaculture placed clams, and then, you would need to know that they were there because the assessment would otherwise think that that was a wild natural set of small clams. So there's also the genetics project going. We know we have different clam haplotypes in our region, so that might also be a consideration as well. I know on the West Coast, like with salmon and some of these other species, genetics are definitely something that factors in. So I think there's a number of questions swirling around there. So at this stage, I don't think it's on there as a proposal to develop a full aquaculture plan. But I think in the short term, maybe the staff could do some follow-up to get a little bit more information for the council.
Thanks, Jessica. That'd be helpful.
You other questions or comments about possible additions? Additional comments or questions about the 2024 draft deliverable document that we just gone through? See anybody? There's another document that I will not go through in detail. It's the 2024 proposed action deliverables project descriptions. That's an additional document that I referenced earlier. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about today, you can go to that document or a description of the project that you may be in. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done, and certainly entertain a motion to approve the document as we've discussed today with the modifications that we made today, so that we're all on the same page for our conversation in December.
Thank you, Chris. Mary, I think you have a motion ready. Yep, I can see it fine. We have a motion on the board, and Michael Lisi, let's make that motion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can make the motion, move to approve the draft 2024 proposed actions and deliverables with the revisions adopted today for development as the 2024 implementation plan.
I think Mary too, can you change that one, I guess, to 2024 implementation plan? In the bold. Do we have a second? Maureen? I don't think we need any discussion on the motion, do we? Today's the 3rd. Are there any objections to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes by consent. With that, let's take a 12-minute break and we'll come back at 3 o'clock when the full council will convene. Thank you.
Test.
Hi, Shelley. You sound good on the webinar.
Test.
I can hear the test from the webinar.
Thanks. We were just having an issue with some of the mics not coming on in the room, so I'm gonna just go around and test. But I can hear it in the room, so I'm good. I don't need you to respond every time.
Are you sure? Glad you can hear me okay, though.
Yes, thank you. Test. 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 So the ones that weren't working, battery out, put it back in, and it's helping.
Meeting.
Carson, you want to do a mic check? Are you about ready to go?
Yep, sounds good, Wes. I'm ready whenever you are. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we're hear you fine. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're get back to the council business. Who's got an echo in here? Somebody's computer on? Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Before we do our next agenda item, I want to mention the passing of Captain James Allen Rule Sr. He's more than a friend and mentor to most of us here. I mean, he's a legend in the fishing business. He passed away on September 28th at the age of 75. Throughout his career, Captain Jimmy was an outstanding advocate for sustainable fishing practices, sustainable marine fisheries, and viable fishing communities. For more than 50 years, he captained the fishing vessel Darren-Era R. He was a council member from 1999 to 2008. He was an advisory member for 12 years for this council. Jimmy was also instrumental in the development of the NEMAP survey, which has been operating on board the fishing vessel Darren-Era R since 2006. NEMAP has been termed the gold standard of collaborative fisheries surveys. In his years, he has received from the Mid-Atlantic Fishing Council the Rick Z. Savage Award in 2006, Fisheries Achievement Award in 2008, from the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission, the Award of Excellence in 2021, and then from the National Fisherman Magazine, the Highliner Award in 2004. With that, can we have a moment of silence for Captain Jimmy? Thank you very much. Bobby, you and your family are in our prayers, and we'll all be thinking about you. A few other things. Pat Gear will no longer be representing Virginia. We have Joe Grist will be now taking his place. John Clark is currently serving for the designee of Delaware, and I think this might be his last meeting. He may be replaced in as early as this. Well, he won't be replaced, but he won't be sitting in the council in December. If not, it'll be February probably when he hires somebody. And Marty Gary is now the new director of the Division of Marine Resources for New York, but Maureen will still be the designee, correct? And if any of you three would like to say anything, we'll listen to you.
Thanks, Wes. It's an honor to sit here for the state of New York. I've put a lot of familiar faces around the table, and I know you from my days either at Maryland DNR or most recently the last 10 years of the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, where I would join the council when the commission jointly met. But I'm privileged and honored to be up in New York now, and as you mentioned, Maureen will continue to represent us. So thank you.
Thank you, Marty. With that, let's go on with our next agenda item, Monkfish and Dogfish Joint Framework to reduce the bycatch of Atlantic Sturgeon. Carson, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry I couldn't be with you all at the hotel in person today. I'll catch up with you next time. Next slide. So jumping right into it, at today's meeting, we're going to cover quite a bit. So we're going to review the background of this joint framework action. This action is joint with the New England Fisheries Management Council. And I'll remind everyone of the outcomes from the Mid-Atlantic and New England June meetings. That was framework meeting 1. And then I'll go over the most recent FMAT and PDT recommendations which includes a range of alternatives. And then I'll give an overview of the joint Dogfish and Monkfish committee recommendations from their September 20th meeting just a few weeks ago. And then lastly, I'll review the New England meeting outcomes where they approved a range of alternatives at their meeting last week. And then the objectives of the meeting today are for the council to approve a range of alternatives for both the Dogfish and Monkfish fisheries, and then consider adopting the committee's research recommendations as well. So this is a snapshot of the action timeline. I won't go into too much detail, but as you may remember, we added this action to our 2023 implementation plan last year, and then the FMAT PDT formed and met in the spring. And in May, the Dogfish and Monkfish APs and committees met, and in June, the councils met. So in September, the FMAT and PDT picked the work back up, and the committee met again in order to narrow down the range of alternatives, which brings us to the highlighted bullet today, which is for this council to approve a range of alternatives as the New England Council did last week. And then after the range is approved, the PDT FMAT will analyze the alternatives and impacts and develop the framework document in preparation for final action. So in late winter, there'll be another set of AP and committee meetings to recommend the preferred alternatives and provide more feedback at that time. And then final action is scheduled for April of next year for both councils. So this slide is a little bit of review as well as some new information that we have. So as you may recall from June, the 2021 biological opinion is still active and stated that Atlantic sturgeon bycatch must be reduced in federal large mesh gillnet fisheries by 2024. And this is the BIOP that resulted in the Sturgeon Bycatch Action Plan produced by that working group formed by NIMFs. And that action plan recommended council action and potential types of measures as well. And that has served as the basis for this action. This month, we received an update from NIMFs that the biological opinion was reinitiated September 13th, 2023. So there's a new consultation. And we did know that this was coming because in June, we were updated that the Sturgeon Incidental Take Statement, or ITS, from the 2021 BIOP was exceeded in gillnet fisheries. So our current understanding of this ongoing process is that the new BIOP can potentially consult on the joint council sturgeon action as part of the reinitiated consultation. So this action could become the baseline for the new BIOP. And we're currently working with GARFO through the FMAT and PDT to share data and make sure that the two processes are informing each other. So this is just a quick reminder of the hotspot areas that for Atlantic sturgeon, bycatch, and gillnet fisheries that were identified in the action plan with data through 2020. These will be updated when we do get the new bycatch data through 2022 or through early 2023. So the map on the left shows the Gulf of Maine and southern New England, and the map on the right shows New Jersey to Virginia. And then the more pink and red areas have the densest sturgeon and gillnet interactions. So there are some interactions in the Gulf of Maine and southern New England. However, the most dense hotspots are off of New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula on the right. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines the outcomes of the June Mid-Atlantic and New England meetings. So the original purpose of those meetings was actually to approve the range of alternatives for the framework. However, at our Mid-Atlantic meeting in June, GARFO did announce that the incidental take statement was exceeded and that a new BIOP was triggered. And so a lot of the discussion at that June meeting focused on the process of the new BIOP initiation and what that really meant for this action. And then a few weeks later, the New England Council met after the Mid-Atlantic, and they did approve a range of monkfish alternatives. However, this was with the understanding that these were still to be refined. And at that meeting, Garfo emphasized the need to continue making progress on this action based on the timeline outlined in the 2021 BIOP. And at their meetings, both councils recommended that the joint Monkfish and Dogfish Committee meet with invited OLE and Coast Guard representatives in order to further refine the range of alternatives with enforcement feedback. And both councils also agreed to include spiny dogfish at mesh sizes of less than 7 inches after some discussions related to the high sturgeon bycatch in the dogfish fishery, even though the BIOP had defined large mesh as 7 inches or greater. So these are the monkfish alternatives that the committee had initially brainstormed in May and the New England Council initially approved, with that caveat of to be refined. And these include soak time restrictions of 48 and 72 hours, gear restrictions of using a low profile gill net, which is only an option for the New Jersey area, and then short time area closures. So these different restrictions would be applied only to the area options and the time options that are listed below. So the area options had included restrictions by statistical area group, as well as 2 different methods of drawing smaller boxes around hotspot areas. One was using 10-minute squares, and one was using parallel lines to create polygons approximating the hotspots. And the timing of the different restrictions are in May and June in southern New England, and December and May in the New Jersey hotspot area. And that's based on observer data through 2022. And then within those timeframes, there were alternatives included for potentially shorter closures as well. So with that initial range of alternatives, there were some enforceability issues raised in terms of whether soak times are enforceable and whether the area options, the 2 different smaller area options made sense from an enforcement perspective, and whether one option may be easier to enforce than the other. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. So similar to monkfish, this slide reviews the dogfish alternatives that resulted from the previous committee recommendations. And these were never approved by either council. So they just came out of that May committee meeting. So for dogfish, we don't have a low profile net gear modification option that hasn't been studied in the dogfish fishery at all yet. The committee included soak time restrictions of no overnight soaks, as well as soak times of 24, 48, or 72 hours. And these would be applied to hotspot areas during times of high interaction. And then in addition to soak times, there's also the closure option. And then for areas where those would be applied, there's the same options as for monkfish, where there's either the statistical area approach or 2 different ways of creating a smaller area to encompass a hotspot. And for the New Jersey hotspot area, the restriction options are for November through December, as well as April. And then Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, the options are from December through January, as well as an option in March. And then similar to monkfish, the committee recommended including options for closures that have the potential to be shorter timeframes. And then with that initial range of alternatives, enforcement did say that the no overnight soak option may be enforceable, which was only included for dogfish. Next slide. So a few weeks ago, on September 7th, the FMAT and PDT met to discuss several aspects of the action. This slide kind of is an overview of those topics. The group discussed the new BIOP and how that relates to the current action. However, the new BIOP had not been reinitiated yet at the time of that meeting. So that the group discussed the need for a range of alternatives that's broad enough to encompass different types of measures to reduce sturgeon bycatch, but also the group recognized the need to stay on the current timeline, given that we're still held to that 2021 BIOP, which needs reductions by 2024. So because of this, the FMAT and PDT discussed the different alternatives and made recommendations to refine them into a reasonable range. And so topics that were covered also included discussion of data loggers as a potential tool to enforce soak times, the enforceability overall of different alternatives, and discussion of the hotspot areas. They also planned and discussed the data and information needs that would be important for analysis in the future, and what needs to be updated for alternative development. So the Sturgeon bycatch action plan from 2022 had mentioned the potential use of data loggers as a tool to enforce soak times, given the general enforceability concerns. And then Garfo and council staff met with Carrie Upit and Ellen Keene, who have worked on this technology and research more as it relates to sea turtle bycatch reduction in trawl fisheries. So the data logger technology is evolving and NIMS has more funding to further develop the tool, but all of these efforts are currently planned for implementation on trawl vessels with a focus on sea turtle bycatch reduction as a research focus. So there's currently no research planned on gillnet implementation as a tool to enforce soak times. Because of this, the FMAT and PDT discussed that in theory, the technology could be applied to gillnet gear, but there has not been initial testing. So data loggers, from their view, data loggers aren't ready for implementation within the timeline of this action. But they did note that the use of data loggers on gillnets could be a useful research recommendation moving forward. And then in general, the FMAT and PDT discussed the overall goal of the action and clarified that it's to reduce sturgeon bycatch overall, not just sturgeon bycatch mortality. And so with this in mind, some of the alternatives include soak time restrictions of 24, 48, and 72 hours. And under these soak times, there's the potential for fishermen to reset the net immediately after they retrieve their gear. So it may not actually decrease the presence of nets in the water. And this point was actually also brought up by advisors in April. So if the nets are reset right away, as would be allowed in the regulations under 24, 48, or 72-hour soak times, there may not actually be a reduction in sturgeon interactions as required for this action. The soak time restrictions overall can be a useful tool in reducing sturgeon mortality, but that's not the immediate charge. And then the exception to this would be the no overnight soak option, because this type of restriction may reduce the overall interactions along with bycatch mortality, because the nets would not be in the water overnight, and that would reduce the amount of nets in the water. So this was the only option that the FMAT PDT discussed as one that could reduce interactions overall. And it also was the only option that was considered more enforceable from the OLE perspective. So getting into some of the FMAT PDT recommendations specific to the alternatives, they recommended that the range of alternatives should be narrowed given some of the issues with some alternatives and in order to remain on the action timeline. And this narrowing still does maintain different types of measures to make sure that there's a range of options analyzed. They recommended the removal of soak times greater than 24 hours for both fisheries for reasons I described on the last slide. They recommended the removal of the 10-minute square smaller area approach, because this approach achieves the same goal of small areas around hotspots as the polygon approach. And the 10-minute square approach may create a shape with more than 4 sides and is more complex. Whereas the polygon approach was preferred for flexibility, especially as the hotspot maps are updated. And that can take into consideration shipping lanes as well. They also recommended the removal of restrictions or closures by entire statistical area, because these stat areas are much larger and they expand well outside of the hotspots. And then also the significant impacts to the fisheries were noted. So next I'll get into the committee meeting discussion and recommendations from September 20th. And then as a reminder, the Office of Law Enforcement and Coast Guard representatives were invited and participated in this committee meeting, which was really helpful. So first, on the topic of gear restrictions and time area closures, they had several comments and discussion. There was concern over the potential for shifting effort to other areas. And in some areas, shifting effort could reduce the fishing overlap with sturgeon, while in other areas, shifting effort may not reduce interactions, depending on how that effort shifts and where the sturgeon are. There was concern over whether a shorter closure would capture the timing of the interactions, which may have some variability from year to year. And based on the mixed AP feedback we've heard this thus far, it's also unclear if low profile gear is ready for large scale commercial use. And then in general, there was discussion of the fact that we'll need to incorporate the most recent sturgeon data into the analyses. And that can help clarify more specifically exactly when and where measures would be applied. So that will also help clarify the alternatives before final action. So some of this is through updated analysis, and then also once the range of alternatives is more narrowed, they can be laid out in a more organized and stepwise list, so that it's more clear to the public and the committee and the councils when they're selecting final action alternatives. And then committee members also discussed the need to analyze the impacts to the markets for both of these fisheries. And there was a general desire to have additional AP input on these measures, which is planned for the winter, as I said in that timeline slide. So the committee also asked a few questions to GARFO that were kind of clarifying questions related to what data were used to prompt the reinitiation of the BIOP, whether there's more specific guidance on the magnitude of reduction in sturgeon interactions, and then will the council action be used for the basis of the new BIOP. And so I think at this point we heard at the New England Council meeting last week that there's not a specific magnitude of reduction. However, the magnitude of the ITS overage can inform the analysis and final decision. And then we also heard from GARFO that the council action will likely be used for the basis of the new BIOP. So moving on to further committee discussion on the specific measures and alternatives. The enforcement representative input is in the right-hand column, and then the joint committee input is on the left-hand column. And for soak time restrictions, the committee discussed that a daytime only soak restriction or something like sunrise to sunset provisions would differ by season and would be shorter in the winter since there's a shorter daytime length. And then they also discussed that fishermen fish differently in New Jersey compared with further south in the mid-Atlantic for dogfish. So this alternative may be more feasible for New Jersey. And then the topic of VMS came up as a tool to address the enforceability issue, which I'll cover in more detail later. And then the committee agreed with the FMED PDT's concerns over the longer soak times where gear could be immediately reset, which would not mitigate bycatch overall necessarily. And then there were concerns over the general need for flexibility and safety if the soak time restrictions were put in place that were daytime only. Because of this, the committee discussed a set end time in the evening instead of a sunset clause as the end of the soak duration. So for example, 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. And then enforcement representatives felt that a sunrise to sunset or a set time such as 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. would both be feasible from the enforcement perspective. They also added that VMS can be helpful with enforcement, but it's not needed to enforce this type of regulation. And then the committee also discussed the short closure options. And as previously mentioned, some members were concerned that interactions may not happen during the same week per year. So a shorter closure, such as a week-long closure, may not provide a consistent reduction. And this requires more fine-scale data than have been provided at this time. So the staff noted that the FMAT and PDT plan to dig into this as the alternatives are analyzed. There was also concern about the impacts of closures in general to fishermen, along with the timing of closures in relation to other fishery dates, such as the beginning of the season. And then enforcement feedback on closures was that they would enforce these areas by looking at any gear markings or hauling gear to confirm mesh sizes. They added that the polygon method of drawing a closed area was simpler and easier to enforce. And they would monitor closed areas the same way they do with other closures, such as some targeted enforcement if they know something is in place at a certain location and time. And then moving on to VMS, overall, this option came up at this committee meeting as a way to ensure that the measures within the alternatives could be enforced. This did not come up at the FMAT and PDT level, so it wasn't discussed by them. Some committee members felt that VMS could be used as an incentive to access certain areas, or that it might be a potential tool to make closed areas smaller and closures shorter, or allow for more dynamic closures, or potentially collect more data on sturgeon. And other committee members voiced concern over the cost of VMS and that it's not widely used, especially for dogfish. And then there was also some confusion over the idea of incentivizing using VMS to access areas, because this action needs to reduce sturgeon bycatch. So there couldn't be special access to a closed area if someone had VMS. And then enforcement provided feedback in general on VMS, and they clarified that the lack of VMS doesn't inhibit enforcement of a gear restricted area or closures. However, it can make enforcement easier given that it provides a known vessel location as well as a fishery declaration. So now moving on to the committee recommendations. They overall agreed with the FMAT and PDT recommendation to remove soak times of 24 hours or greater, because these soak times don't necessarily reduce interactions. And then they supported the removal of the 10-minute square approach and supported the removal of measures by entire statistical area. And then the committee also supported the addition of an alternative to use VMS as an enforcement and management tool as part of both the Monkfish and Dogfish range of alternatives. So the Monkfish committee voted for their plan and the Dogfish committee voted for their plan. Next slide. So the Monkfish committee then recommended the range of alternatives shown on the screen. So these recommendations agree with the FMAT and PDT recommendations, with the exception of that VMS addition highlighted in yellow. Next slide. And then the Dogfish committee recommended the range of alternatives here. And these recommendations once again agreed with the FMAT and PDT, with the exception of as well of adding VMS. And then the committee also discussed research recommendations, and they recommended that the councils add the following research to their research priorities when each council reviews them next. So explore future use of data loggers as a tool to enforce gillnet soak times, and explore the use of low-profile gillnet gear in the spiny dogfish fishery and in the southern New England region for monkfish as a potential future management tool. And then That's everything that I have for the committee summary. The New England Council met last week to receive that committee meeting update and approve the range of alternatives. And at the meeting, members of the Dogfish and Monkfish Committee that are on the New England Council voiced that they no longer supported adding VMS to the range of alternatives. So some of the rationale behind this was that it may not be something that should be pursued specific to this action. It may be outside of the scope. And the other reasons were that there would be a financial burden to fishermen and the benefits to enforceability and sturgeon conservation weren't clear enough at this point. And so because of this, the VMS related committee motions both failed, and VMS was not included in the range of alternatives for either fishery by the New England Council. So the New England Council also passed a motion that approves the committee consensus statement that removed the those 3 recommendations from the FMAT and PDT. So soak time restrictions of 24 hours or greater, 10-minute square approach, and restriction by stat area approach. So with all of that, the New England Council then approved the range of monkfish alternatives. These alternatives once again match the FMAT and PDT and committee recommendations, but also had additional language highlighted in yellow. So this language was modified on the screen at the New England meeting, and it clarifies that closures could be considered for the entire month, whereas previously the language said 4 consecutive weeks, which may be different than, for example, June 1 to June 30th. And then the New England Council approved this range of dogfish alternatives with similar clarifications to that language surrounding the timing of closures. And these once again are in alignment with the FMAT and PDT recommendations, as well as the committee recommendations, with the exception of taking out that VMS option. So the New England Council also accepted the committee consensus statement that the councils add the research recommendations on the screen to their research priorities when next reviewed. And that's all I have. So today's objectives are to approve the range of dogfish and monkfish alternatives to be included in the action, and then potentially endorse the research recommendations. And then the Mid-Atlantic Council staff recommendation for the range of alternatives is to approve the range of alternatives as approved by the New England Council last week. And this is a reasonable range of options as recommended by the FMAT and PDT with enforcement input. The committee also weighed in and generally agreed with these. And this approving the range of alternatives today that is the same as the New England's approved range will maintain the updated action timeline for final action needed in April of 2024. So approving these today will allow the FMAT and PDT to begin analysis after that approval. And that's it.
Thank you, Carson. Do we have any questions for Carson? Peter Hughes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Carson. I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Carson, or maybe it's a question for Mike Pentney. Is there a timeline on when new buyout for Atlantic sturgeon is proposed? Timeline? Thoughts on that?
I think there is a sort of a sketch of a timeline, but it's really dependent on when the councils take final action. If the councils take final action in April, then that would serve as sort of the linchpin of the analysis that would go into the biological opinion, and presumably come out, a few months later. So it all kind of hinges on the council taking final action in April in terms of the timeline.
Peter?
So I would say that, Mike has warned us a little bit that the current buyout that we are working under with the joint Monkfish, Dogfish may be worse than is represented currently. So we may end up moving forward recommendations jointly. Buyout could come out and then back kind of to the drawing board and re-reviewing everything again based on what the buyout says. Hey, we might be fine, but there's also a possibility that we have to check off some boxes again in the future, just as a heads up. Thanks.
Any more questions or comments? And just to make sure I'm right too, and for the new council members, any action that we pass today, we pretty much have to make sure we're in line with New England because both of us have to approve same options.
Yes, that will keep us on the current timeline. So if we diverged from the New England's approved range, then we would then that our conclusions would need to go back to the New England Council for them to discuss as well.
All right, thank you, Carson. Would anybody or Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. So I understand the New England Council removed consideration of VMS, but, and apologies if I missed this, was there any additional discussion and consideration of AIS down the road?
Yeah, so the committee did discuss AIS as a kind of more affordable option for monitoring, but the feedback that we got from enforcement was that because AIS is used for all marine traffic, it would be hard to identify a fishing boat, let alone what fishery they are participating in. So I don't think that it was necessarily going to enhance the enforceability, but I would look to any enforcement people for clarification if that's incorrect.
And Carson, I guess with the new lobster regulations where we've got to have, anybody with a lobster permit has to have a tracking device as well, which here in Delaware and all in Maryland, we don't even know what we're supposed to have on by December. We haven't received anything on that. I guess they can't use that either, correct?
I'm not sure if that could be used, the use of it could be expanded to this action. I think one of the considerations was that VMS was partially discussed as a way to enforce soak time, longer soak times of 24 hours or more. And then those were thought to not have the conservation benefit anyway. So part of it was that, but I think for area closures, it might be an option to pursue what the lobster fleet is having to implement, but that was not brought up by the FMAP PDT or the committee.
All right, thank you. Chris Pat Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound fine.
All right, thanks. And yeah, thank you, Carson, for the presentation. Just a comment, just to add some context, which I think was covered in the meeting summary, but in terms of the closure options of 1, 2, or 3 weeks, one thing that I get, the FMAT's going to look at this. One thing I just kind of raised as a point is if they find a situation where during that 4 or 8 week, 1 or 2 month period that sturgeon are largely present in that area, consistently throughout that time period, year after year. I think the both councils are going to need to carefully consider if we go with a 2 week closure period, and it happened at the beginning of that time slot, whether it's the beginning of the 2-month or 1-month period, whether there's really a conservation benefit there, meaning that if you put it in the closed area for the first 2 weeks, would those sturgeon just be caught after the fishery, the closed area opens again, because they're just kind of in that area at that time? I know those details are going to be hashed out when the FMAT looks at this in a little more detail, but I raised that during the committee meeting because we've had similar issues like that with trying to reduce sturgeon and sea turtle interactions in our estuarine gillnet fisheries. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Seeing any more questions, comments, Sonny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just a question on this AIS and the EMS. Do Coast Guard have computers on their vessels? Could anybody answer that question? When the Coast Guard goes out, if you have AIS and it says fishing vessel Skilligalee, can it not just punch it in and say, there's the Skilligalee, this is what he's doing, this is what this boat's doing? I'm just wondering, with all this conversation, that I can't figure out why the AIS would be not flattable in this condition or this reason.
Peter?
Thanks. I certainly don't represent the Coast Guard, but I think it was a tool for avoidance collision tool, and that's what it's being used. I'm not with the Coast Guard. I would have to say, yeah, they have computers on board their boats. No, I don't go anywhere without this, the computer. So I think it was developed for avoidance collision worldwide, and it's not. I don't think it can do that fine scale stuff we're asking it to do.
And I think also, even on the AIS, you can shut it off quite easily. Eric Reed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I'm pretty sure the AIS requirements now are if you're a vessel over 65 feet, it's to have AIS, 12 miles of the beach. So once you're outside of 12 miles, you can turn the thing off. It's perfectly legal.
And I'm pretty sure most of the gill netters anyway are under 65 feet anyway, so they're not required to have it. We're going to need to break this down into a couple motions. One for the monkfish and then one for the spiny dog. Carson, do you have a draft motion ready for the monkfish?
Yep, I do have a draft motion ready, and while Steven's pulling up the draft motions, I'll note that I have the draft motion, and then under it, for clarity, I do have what that range is. So I don't think that the entire range needs to be read into the motion. But yeah, so the larger font is the actual draft motion. You can scroll back up a little bit, Stephen. Yeah, right there. A little high, a little bit more, so you can see the beginning of. No, other way. There we go.
And there's nothing below the number 2 New Jersey hotspot, correct?
There's a B and a C actually, if yeah, that's all of it now showing on the screen.
Would anybody like to make this motion? Mike Petney. Second by Peter Hughes. Mike, would you like to provide some rationale? Pretty much self-explanatory.
I think Carson did a good job of explaining what happened and trying to do to move forward.
Peter, you good? Anything you want to add? I agree. Yeah, we let New England take the heavy lifting on this. We let them hash all this out before we got to it. Is there any objection to this motion? Any abstentions? Seeing none, it passes by unanimous consent. Stephen, when you're ready, let's scroll down to the next one.
A little higher so we can see the larger font. Yeah, there we go.
Would anybody like to make this motion? Peter Hughes. Second, Sonny Gwynn. Peter, any rationale or gonna go with the same as we did the first one? Is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions? Seeing none, it passes by unanimous consent. Carson, and we also have a third motion, correct?
Yep, that is a little further down. There we go.
Peter?
I'm happy to make that motion, read it in.
Yeah, but the first two, we kind of skipped that, but if you can read it into motion, go ahead.
Yeah, move that the council adds the following research to their research priorities when next reviewed. Explore future use of data loggers as a tool to enforce gillnet soak times, and explore use of low-profile gillnet gear in the spiny dogfish fishery and in the southern New England region for monkfish potential future management. Thank you.
Second, Sonny Gwynn. I don't think we need any rationale on this either. Is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes by unanimous consent. Carson, do you have anything else to bring before us?
No, that's everything that I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you got done quickly. You'll give you a little bit of time. You can keep painting the nursery if you'd like this afternoon.
Sounds good. Distract me from this baby kicking me in the lungs.
All right, since we're a little bit ahead of schedule, let's take another break and we'll come back at 4:05. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get on with our last agenda item for the day, the Illex hold framework final action. Jason, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Okay, this is meeting 2, framework meeting 2 for the Illex hold action, and the council can take final action on this. So quick agenda review, go through the purpose of the action, the alternatives, summarize the advisory panel input, and then look at the committee motions. This is review again. The purpose is looking to add a volumetric vessel hold baseline for the roughly 76 Illex limited access permits. Purpose is to better cap fishing vessel power of the fleet. This is a follow-up action to the disapproved Illex permit amendment that looked to reduce the number of Illex permits, and this is kind of a follow-up from that. There are also a couple alternatives to require vessels to identify their processing type when they go through their annual permit application renewal. And the purpose of that is to help inform catch per unit of effort analyses. So no action for this across the board would mean just retaining the current horsepower and length baselines and upgrade restrictions that exist for our limited access vessels, Illex, at least most of our limited access permits. So those baselines are static, and it's generally based on the vessel that first qualified for the permit. And also then the current permit information requirements would persist, things that the people have to submit each year when they renew their permits. So reviewing the alternatives, 2A and 2B are fairly similar. If selected or approved, 2A would say, okay, if you have one of these in place for mackerel and 30 of those 76 do, that would be used. That would be the baseline for those 30. For the 46 others, NIMS will publish requirements like they did when the council did this for mackerel, that they'd have to get a survey of the hold volume by a qualified individual, and in the regs is a long list of the types of professionals who can do that. And then there'll also be a 10% hold upgrade restriction. So if a vessel is upgraded or replaced, it has to stay within that 10% upgrade restriction. So basically mirroring the mackerel rules. The existing baselines still apply. Nothing changes with them. They just apply as they would under no action or action. The existing length horsepower restrictions and baselines stay in place. Where 2A and 2B differ a little bit is how vessels in confirmation of permit history or CPH are treated. So I just added a slide for a little background on CPH. CPH is when the permit's on the shelf. Vessels do not equal permit suites. They're kind of separate things, and permit suites can be moved around among vessels if you stick within the baselines. Generally, a permit suite ends up in CPH if the vessel sunk or the vessel was sold without its permits. So a permit suite can be put into CPH and then taken out on another vessel as long as it stays within the baselines once per fishing year. So that can get into some kind of thorny things with vessel replacements and the exact timing of when that occurs. Sometimes people will get in a bind. They try to take a permit suite out of CPH twice in a year. That can't happen, but it doesn't really, it's not a critical thing for this action. But when I was just checking my summary of CPH with the permit office, they were like, this is one thing that is just kind of good to remind folks of. So the difference between 2A and 2B is that if the council selected 2A, the vessels would be required to have the whole baseline, but CPH vessels, there's 6 of them roughly, and that can change a little bit week to week, month to month, could use an existing survey if they happen to have it before the permit suite was put into CPH on the, from the preceding vessel. Or they can, when during the implementation period, it'd be like a use it or lose it. During that 12-month period where you're applying, NIM says, okay, all Illex vessels, you got to submit your vessel hold documentation. And for those vessels in CPH, they could either use a survey if they happen to have one, previously done, or they would just have a survey done the first time the permit suite comes out of CPH and is put on a vessel. They kind of have the option there. 2B says no, if you had a survey of an existing vessel that's from a previous vessel, you can't use that. Just whatever vessel the permit suite is put on first, when it comes out of CPH, if it comes out of CPH, you'd have to get a volumetric hold measurement, and that become your baseline, whatever that first vessel that comes out is. Those are, so in either case, you end up with, most of the Illex permits would have this hold baseline and an upgrade restriction. But then the difference is just how those probably roughly half dozen vessels in CPH are addressed. So again, there's 76 of these permits currently, 6 are in CPH. 30 already have this upgrade restriction because of their mackerel permit. And so really you're talking about affecting 46 vessels here. The other alternative, I'll call it, they're not like in formal groups in the document, but the alternative 3 and 4 are kind of they're a different theme here. And so it's just as vessels as they're reapplying for the annual permits, they'd have to check a box. They would document how they intend to process their squid. It wouldn't be binding if vessels had something occur in the year and they wanted to change. It's really just a starting point. When we did this in the Illex assessment, and it was challenging to try to reconstruct who was using what processing type. So it would really just be a starting point for such analyses. And the centers, from my discussions with them, indicated that it would be useful. But they're also committed to kind of ongoing dialogue with industry if they're starting to try to develop CPUE indices. There's a lot of other things you'd want to understand about processing and limitations of catch and fishing power. So they wouldn't just be depending on this, but at least be a starting point, have a sense of how different vessels are intending to process squid. Okay, so quick summary of AP input. So throughout the development of this action, there have been AP members on both sides. Those who advocate for adopting this flag, concerns with capacity, overcapacity in the fleet, further overcapitalization of the fleet, fairness given about 2/5 of the vessels are already constrained, similarly due to mackerel. On the other side, folks say, we're already really constrained by lots of other requirements. This will further reduce our flexibility, further reduce our ability to modernize, and that they have enough restrictions. So it's been pretty consistent through the process. And there were some comments in the briefing book and supplemental for this meeting, and those kind of general pro and con themes were carried forward in those comments. Just recapping kind of some earlier work on potential costs for previous action. Staff had called around to some different surveyors, tried to ballpark what these might be like, and staff got a wide range of potential costs for different size vessels. Public comments through both the previous Illex action and this one have indicated that they can't imagine paying the high end of those for these kind of surveys. A lot of them have it done anyway, and that they would expect vessels could find it at the lower end of these ranges. I mean, I think I've kept this range in there for no other reason that if if the council adopts this and implements it, at least folks are aware to do some shopping around because, again, when I called folks, I got a wide range of potential costs. On the processing type component alternatives, some of the AP members have expressed concern that, okay, you say it's not binding now and it's just informational, but what if you make it binding in the future and that jams us up, further reduces flexibility? I mean, any council, even if the council went with no action, could consider a binding requirement in the future, but it's really not the intent here. And I can't see where that would serve a purpose, where I can see that having a general sense of which vessels are using the different processing types would serve a purpose. Okay, so the next steps for today, if folks have any questions and discussion, and then we do have a few committee motions. Thank you.
Questions for Jason? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure why this has been a challenge for me, but for some reason, I know I've read it 5 times. I can't figure out what the difference between 2A and 2B are and which one provides more flexibility, which one is less flexible. Just trying to understand the pros and cons of the 2A and 2B. I understand 3 and 4. I've got that, but it's the 2A and 2B I'm just really struggling with. I think because I don't work on, with vessels of this that work in this fishery. And it's just something hard. It's challenging. Mike, can you help me understand just in the most simple terms you can, what the difference is?
Yeah, so 2A provides the most flexibility to industry. The basic concept as I'm thinking about it is vessel goes into CPH because it sank, burned to the ground, or the vessel was sold and the permits were held by the previous owner. And so let's say that the vessel that was that the permits were on before they went into CPH, the vessel had a hold capacity. I'm just pulling a number. I don't know what a reasonable number for a hold capacity is, but say 10,000. The vessel hold capacity, they got a survey for some reason, and the vessel hold capacity was 10,000. So then the permits went into CPH for whatever reason that prompted that, and the owner wants to bring those permits out of CPH and put them on another vessel. The vessel that's available, say tomorrow, has a hold capacity of 8,000. If the owner is allowed to use the prior survey from the prior vessel, then they get a baseline of 10,000 with the option to go up to 11,000 with a 10% increase. That gives them flexibility moving forward to have a larger vessel. The vessel they're bringing those permits out on only has a hold capacity of 8,000. If that becomes the baseline, then their future opportunities will be limited to 8,800. So they have more flexibility if they can use the prior survey to establish the baseline. If they're not allowed, so 2A would allow them to do that. 2B would not. 2B would say, you're bringing the permits out of CPH, the first vessel those go on gets surveyed and becomes the baseline.
And if I could just follow that up, Mr. Chairman. So in your example though, Mike, in 2A, the boat that was purchased was smaller, had a smaller capacity than the original baseline. What if the purchased boat was a greater capacity? That would help me there.
Yeah, I think that's why 2A is written to say is either or. It's to the choice of the permit holder. So they've got a survey. but the vessel they want to put those permits on has a larger hold capacity, 11,000, 12,000. So then they could survey that and establish that as the baseline. But you're giving them the option, whichever is in their interest, long-term interest, versus requiring them to use the first vessel that those permits go on after coming out of CPH.
So that new vessel could be substantially larger as a possibility, given that scenario.
Well, I mean, theoretically, but they still are bound by the 10% upgrade restrictions on length. So the hold capacity may not apply yet, but the other baseline restrictions still do apply as a sort of backstop to what that new vessel could be.
And just for my clarity too, if it already has a mackerel permit on it, it doesn't have the option of changing vessels, correct? It has to, it's the baseline, it's already with the mackerel.
Right, if they already have a hold capacity baseline established in our records through the mackerel action, then none of these issues apply. They've already got that baseline, that's capped. The 2A and 2B really have to do with vessels that don't have an already established hold capacity baseline that may be in CPH when we implement this. What are their options?
All right, thank you. Chris Pat Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, on alternatives 3 and 4, if the council didn't choose either of those, are there other ways to collect that information from the fishery to help with CPUE estimates, or is this really the only way to try to capture that for future analysis? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we did a good bit of that work during the last Illex assessment, talking to just industry contacts, saying, okay, here are the vessels that have been active. You know, can you tell me about them? And industry was really collaborative, and we got that done. In terms of when vessels may have changed, you know, some of that historic you know, knowledge may have been lost, but I think we did a pretty good job. But I think, you know, it took a lot of time trying to track down all the different vessels. And so, you know, talking to folks in cooperative research at the center, the new assessment scientists, I think folks there's pretty good consensus there that this would be a kind of a useful baseline of information to have to kind of start building off of.
Adam Nowalski.
Staff memo for this action today concludes with a sentence that there may be benefit in adopting a hold baseline now and then reevaluating periodically. This action does not have an alternative with a sunset provision in it. So what is staff recommending as a provision to ensure that that reevaluation takes place?
So we review the fisheries with the AP and the fishery information document each year. One of the components of that we ask them each year is, are there any other kind of things that you think the council should know about management of this fishery? So there's nothing, you know, there's no sunset provision. There's none proposed, but I think there is an annual review of every fishery, and there'd be opportunity for, you know, to consider if there's some issue has popped up. And I think that, you know, the issue that potentially, you know, would crop up would be, okay, has this restriction now have some mismatch with the potential opportunities in the fishery? And I think the AP would flag that to us pretty quickly if it occurred.
Any more questions? Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following up on Chris Bassavage's question, it sounds like the only other way to obtain this information on, processing type is to go and ask industry. If we don't prove inclusion of this as a non-binding, declaration on permanent renewal.
I mean, theoretically, that could be done. I mean, I would guess it would be more likely that, again, at some future Illex assessment, we'd try to figure out if things had changed. So you're kind of depending on the continuity of kind of institutional knowledge over time that, again, our staff sense and from multiple science center contacts, it'd be useful to have that be collected in a more systematic fashion.
Any more questions for Jason? Would anybody like to entertain a motion? Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I emailed Jason a motion that I'm gonna throw up there and we'll see where it goes.
And I'll flag, so there was, can I give a little background on the committee motions first? Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So there are two motions that came out of committee. One was specific to alternative 2A and 2B. And the committee, at the committee meeting, was not ready to make a recommendation to the council between those two. So while there is an alternative, hold on, we'll just get them back on the screen here. Okay, yeah, just those first, okay. So while number one up on the screen right now was a motion from the committee, it really was not a recommendation on a particular alternative. So I'll kind of included that on these for reference. But again, that is not really a motion designed to be immediately kind of transmitted to the council for action. But the second one regarding alternatives 3 and 4 was a recommendation from the committee regarding final action on this. So I think it's up to the council right now. Would you like to take up that committee motion from alternatives 3 and 4 first, or look at, again, Michelle said she had a motion regarding alternatives 2. So it may be cleanest to kind of go through the committee side of things first on that alternatives 3 and 4, since that was a recommendation from the committee, and then turn to the hold alternatives next.
All right. So all right, well, let's see if we can make this simple, hopefully. Peter, would you like to make the motion on the committee's behalf? And the second one on alternatives 3 and 4?
I would. But just for clarification, is that the check the box?
Yes, alternatives 3 and 4 is to check the box on your intended processing type.
Okay. Sure. I move that the council adopt alternatives 3 and 4. This was a committee motion.
Right, it's committee motion. We don't need a second. Any discussion on the motion? Any public? Anybody online? Seeing none, is there any objections to the motion? Any abstentions on the motion? Seeing none, it passes by unanimous consent. I think that's going to be the easy one of the two. And Michelle, if you're ready to make your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just let it scroll up or down, whichever the direction might be. Okay. I move that the council adopt alternative 2A as a preferred alternative, a permit and confirmation of permit history, or CPH, that had an existing certified volumetric hold baseline measurement immediately prior to entering CPH, could use that measurement to establish a vessel hold baseline for that vessel's Illex permit within the 12-month implementation period.
Do we have a second? Mike Belisi? Discussion on the motion? Michelle Duval?
I know this has been a difficult issue for the committee, and there's been a lot of, strong opinions on either side of this. I think, I see this as a very limited provision, as Jason indicated, as the regional administrator indicated. This is sort of a use it or lose it provision within that 12-month implementation period. And if a vessel that does have a previous certified measurement chooses not to use it, then it simply defaults to the first vessel out of CPH that you choose to put your permits on.
Discussion around the table. Eric Reed?
I don't know why the word immediately. As long as you had, if you have an existing hold measurement, whether it was done immediately prior or 5 years prior, what's the difference?
Michelle?
It's just a copy and paste from the document.
Jason?
So the intent was just I think had been some discussion at our previous committee of just trying to clarify that it was the first vessel that preceded the permit suite's entry into CPH. So the immediately preceding is related to the vessel, just the last vessel that it was on before it went into CPH. That's the intent of the immediately preceding.
Any more around the table? Anything from the audience? Greg?
Greg DiDomenico, Lund's Fisheries. Just wanted to lend my support to this motion and just wanted to thank everybody for careful consideration of this and the hard work that went into it. Thank you.
Anybody online? Well, seeing none, I think Michelle's given us good rationale on everything. Let's see if we can pass this one by consent. If not, we'll go to a vote. Is there any objections to the motion? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes by unanimous consent. That was as easy as the first one. Jason?
Does the council need a motion to submit the framework? I'm just double checking. I'm not quite sure, but just checking in the front.
Yeah, I've been told, yes, we do. Peter Hughes?
Well, I'm happy to make that motion. I say that the council submit framework number.
We number them later in the process, so I just say the Illex hold framework.
Illex hold framework. Who are we submitting it to? Agency? Garpo.
And my computer was acting up, so I just want to extend thanks to other staff who are dealing with the motions for this agenda item. Need one more L in Illex. And
Peter, would you
then
like,
next line would be Hughes. Just for the maker.
and Mike Luisi seconded it. I don't think we really, Peter, would you like to read that into the record?
Sure. Move to submit the Illex hold framework to Garpo.
Any objections to the motion? Any abstentions? One abstention. Garfo? With that, the motion passes by consent. Jason, is there anything else?
That does it for this action. In thinking about an earlier question about getting the information, I will relay that a lot of the information that went into things for the Illex assessment came from Captain Rule. And one of my first interactions with him was, I think I tried to look for we had transcriptions back then, and I tried to find it, but I couldn't. I think it may have been at a committee meeting, and we were describing butterfish mesh analyses. And again, so this is 2007, probably when I was first there. He said, "Jason, you seem like a nice kid, but you have no idea what you're talking about." And it was about a thing of how observers were measuring mesh. And he was right. And the center turned it into a case study of how it was really important to really follow the protocols closely. And we had to kind of redo a bunch of analyses because there were issues with consistency of mesh measurements. So just wanted to relay that about Captain Rule.
Thank you, Jason. I got a feeling for the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to hear stories from Jimmy about stuff similar to the het. With that, we are done with our items for today. Chris, do you have an announcement?
We have hospitality this evening. It's in room 819, 819. See you there. Thanks. What's that? Got to get. Well, let's do this. If you're attempting to get to the 8th floor and can't do it, make sure you call me and I'll come get you. Or I'll send Shelley.
All right, with that, we're done for the day. We'll see everybody at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you.